Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ashley Hawes. I'm the Director for Consumer Information at Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar will be recorded. We will be sharing the link with all of you in an email in the next week. Please feel free to share that with any colleagues who could not join us today. You may submit a question at any time using the Q&A or chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We have staff monitoring to convey your questions to our presenters and to answer any technical questions you may have. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from three experts in the field of affordable and accessible housing. Linda Couch is Vice President of Housing Policy at LeadingAge, an organization of more than 5,300 mission-driven organizations representing the full continuum of aging services. Linda oversees LeadingAge's affordable housing policy work, which is focused on expanding and preserving affordable housing options for very low-income seniors, connecting senior housing to health services, and ensuring affordable senior housing communities have the resources and tools necessary to respond to COVID-19. Joining us from Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging subsidiaries, we have Sonia Edwards, Principal Broker and Executive Director of Branches Real Estate, Ohio's first full-service nonprofit real estate agency. And finally, we'll hear from Elizabeth Sanchez, the Homeownership Manager for Empowering and Strengthening Ohio's People, also known as ESOP. Elizabeth has been providing comprehensive housing and financial counseling and instructing homeownership workshops to homeowners to empower individuals and prepare families to achieve and sustain homeownership for almost 25 years. I will now turn it over to Meredith Ponder-Whitmire, Vice President at Matz Blancato and Associates, who will introduce today's topic. Meredith?
Hi, everyone. I am so excited on behalf of Benjamin Rose and the Elder Justice Coalition to welcome you to today's webinar on safe and affordable housing. We at the Elder Justice Coalition really believe in this topic. It is something that is so important to keeping older adults safe, so that they don't have to live in unsafe situations if they can access affordable housing. So we're very excited to hear today's speakers and learn some more about housing policy. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Linda.
Great, thanks Meredith, and so happy to be here today. Really appreciate the Elder Justice Coalition and the Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging convening today's session. I have a presentation and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. I plan on talking about some about affordable housing need among older adults with low incomes, and then talking about some projections and some of the programs that we have in the United States to address these needs and the advocacy that is needed to expand the programs. So programs for our housing, but also the programs that help connect housing and services for older adults. So we can go ahead and get started here. So the first screen is pretty basic, right? Just to make sure that people are clear that only 1 in every 3 eligible seniors receive the housing assistance that they're eligible for. Housing assistance in the United States is not an entitlement program like maybe other types of safety net programs are. Just because you need housing help doesn't mean you get it. There are often very long waiting lists for housing assistance. I think in DC, if you were to get on a waiting list for housing and didn't meet any of the preference categories, you could wait 60 or 70 years for affordable housing. So the waiting list can be very long and the programs are much smaller than they need to be. I'm going to dive in a little bit more than that basic slide on what affordable housing needs in this country look like. And there's lots of ways to slice and dice what affordable senior housing needs look like. One report that we look to on a regular basis is HUD's worst case housing needs report. And this is a term of art in the housing world. To have a worst case housing need is to be a renter, is to be very low income, which means your income of your household is below 50% of the area median income, and you're either spending more than half of that very low income on your housing costs, or you're living in severely substandard housing. And more than 97 or 98% of worst case needs households fall into that former category, where they are spending more than half of their incomes on their very low incomes on their housing. So in the last HUD report on worst case needs, HUD determined that there are about 2.24 million older adult households with worst case needs. And you see the red arrow, and the older adults in this chart are in the gray part of the chart at the bottom. And you see that number steadily going up. And of course, that's a function of the nation aging, but it's also a reflection of the dramatic shortage of affordable housing for all types of households in this country. Worst case needs among older adult households have actually increased 69% since 2009, between 2009 and 2019. So pretty significant increases there. And just be clear here, more than any other group, older adults are cost burdened. And the federal government says you can be housing cost burdened if you're spending more than 30% of your household income on your housing costs. And if you're spending more than 50% of your household income for housing, you're severely cost burdened. And this is a chart that came out last year from Justice and Aging and the National Low Income Housing Coalition that looked at renter households in the United States, and really kind of paints a picture of the cost burdens. So that's the blue bars, right? Those are households spending more than 30%, 53% of 62 plus households are doing that if you're a renter. And if you are over 75, the cost burden scenario gets worse. A couple things to note on these next two slides, and this won't surprise anybody, but that the lower your income, and this chart spells it out if you ever want to dig back into it, the lower your income, the much more likely you are to have a housing cost burden, right? So you'll see in the far left bars, these are extremely low income households, and that's a category of households who have incomes below 30% of the area median household income. So these extremely low income households, you can see, are much more likely than some of the other categories to have housing cost burden. So no surprise, right? The poorer you are, the more likely you are to be housing cost burdened. But this next chart shows how, you got to turn the knife here when it comes to older adults, because non-white older adults, and of course, there is a racial component and a racial disproportionality to all of this. Non-white older adults are the most likely to be the lowest income, to be in this extremely low income group. And this is where I thought I would put in a slide around homelessness. And because we're talking about the lowest income households, we're talking a little bit about racial disproportionality and the lack of affordable housing. And I just don't want to go through the entire presentation and put homelessness at the end as a footnote. I just want to make really clear that homelessness is growing among older adult households in the United States. And it is actually growing faster than the nation is aging. So it is not just that we are becoming an older country, it's this lack of affordable housing. We're not building enough, we're not preserving enough. And I would also say that, what we know about the increases in homelessness among older adults isn't probably everything we need to know. It's far short of what we need to know. The data are poor. and there are undercounts. HUD's data looks at kind of weird brackets of age groups and has, for some of their homeless data, only has if you're above 25 years old. And so the data is poor, and we know that there are undercounts of homelessness. But for the counts that we do have, we have seen homelessness increasing in the United States. And in the older adult population of people experiencing homelessness, you see a lot of people who have never before they're 50 become homeless for the first time. You know, of course, there are people who are what we would consider chronically homeless, right? So people experiencing long-term homelessness who have a disability, maybe have some addiction issue, but then in the older adult population, we're also seeing a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness for the first time after they're 50. And I know for older adult programs, we often talk about 62 or 65 years old. And homelessness, we go down to a much younger age because people living on the street, people living without stable housing, age faster, and you know, people say about 15 years faster than people who are stably housed. And so there is some data here where you can see the population 51 to 61 is increasing, and these are HUD data, and the population of homelessness among 62 plus is also growing. Now, are these millions of people? No, you know, that's somewhere in the 75 to 100,000 person range, which is horrible, right? To think about that many people in that age group living on the streets, living in cars, living in shelters. But that's also a much more achievable number. And so, you know, we have hope that as we work to prevent homelessness, we're also going to be able to get the resources to end homelessness. And as I mentioned, there is a distinct racial disproportionality to homelessness among all people who are experiencing homelessness, not just older adults. 39% of people experiencing homelessness are Black. But Black households, Black people only represent 12% of the US population. So there's a lot behind these numbers that goes into, you know, the country's deep racist and segregated history. So that's sort of where we're at now. And then we always want to look and see where we're headed and what the projections are. Right now, we know that older adults are increasing, right? In 2018, they represented 18% or 26% of all US households. By 2038, they're expected to represent 34% of all US households. And we're seeing huge gains in the 80-plus-year-old households. But these are data on this chart that I really wanted to take a minute and share. This is Urban Institute projections that came out last year in 2021. And what they said is that, you know, let's look and see all the, you know, what do we project as far as new household formation over the next 20 years. And the Urban predicted that between 2020 and 2040, right, so we're squarely in the beginning of that, there'll be about 16 million new households formed, right? Some younger ones, some older ones, some in between. But of those 16.1 million, Urban predicts that 13.8 of them will be headed by someone older than 65. And of those 13.8, 40% of them will be renters. So Urban projects fewer older adults to be homeowners in the future, therefore more of them to be renters. And that of those renters, the number of older Black renters will more than double from 1.3 million to 2.6 million by 2040. And Urban focuses on this because, as we just reviewed, non-white households are not as economically equal as white households are not as economically equipped to pay market rate rents for their housing. And so Urban therefore predicted that we would really need to see surges and increases in affordable senior housing, precisely because so many of the older adult renters who are coming to be will not be white renters. And this is a chart. This was sort of a second phase of the urban report that looked at, the top states where they were going to see these big gains. And I think their whole chart, and there's a link to it there on the bottom, shows, I think, 15 states, but these are the top 10. And you'll see right now, so in California, for example, 16% of renters today, or 16% of seniors rent today, but by 2040, 24% will. So you can see these states who have double-digit gains over the next 20 years with the number of older adults who will be renting in those states. And we are woefully unprepared to meet those needs. Since we talked so much about renting, I wanted to make a couple of points about home ownership. And as someone who spent my whole career working in affordable housing, I really have mostly focused on rental housing and the need to expand and preserve affordable rental housing. But home ownership in the older adult space is so important. And for a couple of reasons I want to go into right now. And the first is the wealth building that home ownership provides households with. And this is a chart from Harvard's Joint Center for housing. And this chart really lays out, if you take a minute later to look at the numbers, even for households who have pretty much the same incomes, whether or not they're owner households or renter households, and these are all 65 plus households, makes a huge difference in their wealth, and their non-housing wealth, and then their total wealth, which would include home equity. And so if you look at those top couple of bars going across for the lowest income quartile, so these are households with pretty similar median incomes. You can see the stark difference between non-housing wealth and, of course, net wealth. And you see those differences between owners and renters as you go up the income quartiles. And this is really important, right? Because these are the dollars that older adults are going to need to rely on to pay whatever services and assistance they need that Medicare or Medicaid don't cover, and which we know are a lot. And so renters here are, have a lot less to fall back on. And so, as a affordable senior housing advocate, I do spend some time working on and promoting programs that support home ownership equity for all types of households. And I say equity because, of course, there's a racial bias here too, right? There's about a 30% gap between white home ownership rates and Black home ownership rates. And so that really matters when we're talking about people's ability to age with the resources they need to be able to take care of themselves. So this gap is something that, I think every administration has tried to close since I've been working in the housing space, but today the gap is wider than ever. And today the gap is wider than it was, or it's as wide as it was when we passed the Federal Fair Housing Act in 1968. So, home ownership is really an important linchpin, and not just any home ownership, right? We want people to be able to have homes in neighborhoods that are going to increase, that are going to gain that equity, in a way that's meaningful, that are going to be close to good schools and close to good jobs. And so home ownership policy kind of fits all into what we're talking about today. Also, what fits into what we're talking about today, we're going to review some of the main federal housing programs, and these are the main federal rental assistance programs. So people lucky enough to get it, these are the programs that are working really hard to meet the needs of older adults with low incomes today. And there are programs at HUD. There are programs through what's called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And the third bucket I put on here are the programs through the USDA's Rural Housing Service Program. This is a real broad overview of HUD's housing programs. Most of HUD's housing programs are in these two buckets of programs. One bucket is the housing programs that public housing agencies, sometimes called public housing authorities. Sometimes they don't have the word public or housing or agency or authority even in their names anymore. They change their names, but public housing authorities typically own and administer public housing and the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and then a kind of a flavor of the Housing Choice Voucher Program that's called project-based vouchers. The Housing Choice Voucher Program is the nation's largest rental assistance program, and that's a program through which you get on the waiting list at your local housing authority. You get to the top of the list, and once you're at the top of the list, the agency says, here's a voucher. You have 60 or 90 days, whatever it tells you, to find an apartment whose rent is reasonable enough and whose quality is good enough that we're going to allow you to use the voucher in that apartment. And the landlord has to accept the voucher as a form of payment. And once you identify that unit, you can move into that apartment. Public housing is actually owned by the Public Housing Authority, and public housing is what we, it's small apartment buildings, large apartment buildings. Sometimes they're high rise. The vast majority of them are kind of garden style, 2 or 3 floor buildings. And public housing is both owned and managed by the local Public Housing Authority. You switch over, and HUD has contracts with public housing authorities, public housing agencies. Those are the same entity. We just call them different things, to pay for these housing subsidies. The other bucket is on the right of this screen, and this is where private owners are involved, and they own and manage individual apartment buildings that each have their own contract with HUD. And not just, they have nothing to do with a local housing authority. A private owner has a building, an apartment building, and they have a contract with HUD and agree, if they serve people with low incomes, to make that housing available for X number of years, 20, 30, 40 years. And people will cycle in or out. One of the programs we'll talk probably the most about today is HUD's Section 202 program. This is HUD's Supportive Housing for the Elderly program. It's HUD's flagship senior housing program. And only nonprofits in the Section 202 program nonprofits are eligible to be in the Section 202 program, and those nonprofits own the housing and they run it. The largest kind of private owner program is called Section 8, and it's Section 8 project-based rental assistance. So the voucher is tenant-based, right? It sticks to the tenant, but Section 8 project-based assistance is where a project, a building, an apartment building, this multifamily housing has the contract with HUD headquarters. And nonprofit and for-profit owners own and manage Section 8 project-based rental assistance. And there's a lot of older adults who live in all of these programs. And I think the next screen kind of breaks it down. Oh, not quite. You have to wait a second to get there. These are other HUD programs. Let me go back because I don't want to lose track of a couple of things here about these programs, which all these HUD programs, public housing, the voucher program, Section 202, Section 8, also called project-based Section 8 or project-based rental assistance. These programs work in very similar ways when you get right down to it when it comes to residents and older adults. In these programs, residents pay 30% of their adjusted household income toward their rent. And so HUD has a pretty complicated, you can exclude certain things from your income and make different adjustments to your income to figure out what your actual official income is. But at the end of the day, residents pay about 30% of their adjusted household income for their rent. And if their income goes up, their rent goes up. If their income goes down, their rent goes down. And that's the beauty. That's one of the beautiful things about the HUD programs, is that residents' incomes can ebb and flow, but residents will always know that they'll never be too poor to live in HUD-assisted housing, and that their income will never be too intermittent, that their income will never have to show, pay stubs earning X percentage of your total rent over a certain amount of time. The HUD programs are really meant to be there as a stable housing force, even if resident incomes go up and down, which we know they often do. Not quite as much, obviously, for older adults, but sometimes they do. And when that happens, the programs remain there for them. And what will change is the federal subsidy. So Congress appropriates money for these programs every year, and residents pay 30% of their income for their housing. And the federal subsidy comes in on top of that to make up the difference between what residents pay toward rent and what it actually costs to run quality programs. And so all these HUD programs have that resident and subsidy rent structure in common. There are no time limits to these programs, and there's no mandatory service component to them. This is all independent housing. HUD also has other programs, and these get administered not through the private owners or through the public housing authorities or agencies we just talked about. Two of them, the HOME program, and that's an acronym, HOME, and Community Development Block Grants. These are both block grant programs that go to every state and most larger local governments, so county governments, city governments, and these are very flexible programs. Home, as the name implies, all of that money has to get used in some way for housing programs, and there are, they have to serve households with incomes below, I think 60% of AMI or 80% of area median income. Community development block grant programs are a little more flexible in that they generally use for community development. However, the community decides to use them, again, with some income targeting around them. But these are important programs to be aware of that most larger cities and local governments have at their disposal, and that state governments definitely do. Homeless assistance grants are another bucket of HUD programming, and these dollars go to different entities depending on how the state or local governments are structured. A lot of these funds go to what HUD calls continuums of care, and those are bodies made up of representatives from all the social services and housing agencies that work to address homelessness in a geographic area. And those continuums of care receive direct funding of homeless assistance grants and other funds to prevent and end homelessness. And then there are other smaller HUD programs that might address people living with HIV or AIDS, obviously fair housing programs. There's a program called Section 811, which is specifically for people with disabilities. So HUD has a lot of programs, and these are just a few more of them. But the ones I mentioned before, public housing vouchers, 202s, Section 8, those are the big ones. And I just wanted to share with you who is served by HUD's housing programs. And this, you see the data sources down there at the bottom. All told, HUD's programs serve almost 5.1 million households. So these are subsidized units, these are subsidized homes. And of those, you can see toward the right, 39% have someone who's either the head of household or the spouse of the head of household who is 62 plus, and 4% over age 80. And you can see here how big the housing choice voucher, the Section 8 voucher, how big that program is, right? There are 2.6 million vouchers in the US. The 202 program, it's not quite representative of the size of the program because a lot of the 202s are also in project-based Section 8. 202 program is about 400,000 units all told. And of course, that's 100% seniors, but you can get a sense of the size. But what I really wanted you to see here, besides the percent over the 62 and 80-year-olds, is the average income of these households. And so these are average household incomes, and therefore there are households with incomes above this, and there are a lot of households with incomes below this. This gets back to this fact that you're never too poor to live in HUD-assisted housing. So just a quick review of why we love the HUD programs, and I went ahead and put a little heart in there. So we love the HUD housing programs, and I didn't talk about this yet, but they are deeply income targeted. So a long time ago, sadly, the federal government, Congress said, you know, we don't have enough housing assistance to go around. We've got to figure out a way to get it to the people who need it the most first. And so large portions of those big programs we just talked about, public housing, vouchers, Section 8, 202, must serve, well, they all must serve households below a certain income level to make sure that the programs are deeply targeted to the households that need it the first. And then they have, some of them even have targeting within them to make sure that the very, very lowest income households get served by those programs. And you see that borne out in those really low average income levels. Without this deep income targeting, which is statutorily mandated and HUD, HUD overseen and mandated, imposed, housing authorities, owners, operators, even the best of them probably wouldn't on their own target the very lowest income households because they're so poor and the amount they can afford to pay for housing is so low. And so it's with these federal requirements that we're able to figure out the federal subsidy that's needed and get people the housing they need and get the subsidy to the owners that they need to run the housing. And as I said, sometimes, not often enough, there is a connection to voluntary supports and services. And I'll say a couple more things about that as it relates to the Section 202 program, which I said was HUD's flagship senior housing program. The Section 202 program, it's all across the country, is around 400,000 units of Section 202 homes. And about half of them, about 45% of them actually have what HUD calls a service coordinator in their building. And the service coordinator is really this wonderful linchpin between the residents and the services that are available in the community. The goal of the service coordinator is to help residents age in community for as long as possible and avoid much more costly and sometimes completely unnecessary institutionalization in places like a nursing home, etc. So the service coordinators are really important, and they work with residents to identify what needs are and then work to identify services and supports in the community to help residents access those services at aging community as long as possible. You can have a full-time live-in aide if you live in a 202 home. You can have someone comes in 6 times a week, once a week, to help you with really anything you might need that's going to help you remain in your independent housing. So this connection to services is really robust in about half of the Section 202 units. And I'd say in public housing, there are some programs. There's a program called the Resident Opportunity and Supports Program that tries to replicate that and get those services connected. But there is so much more that can be done to help connect HUD-assisted residents with the health and wellness supports that they need to really age successfully in community. And as I said, none of the HUD programs have any time limits, and nor do they have any work requirements. But then you got to read the fine print, right? And so the fine print says, oh man, Linda said this was great. The waiting list can be very long, and it really is a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it has to do with the size of the unit, right? Some 202 homes and buildings were built in a really what they call a cost constrained period of Congress, where they said, we're not going to do too much money, don't get too fancy on us. And so they were all efficiency units, and seniors are like, ooh, I don't want to move to 400 square feet. But other places, the people are like, yeah, I'll live in 400 square feet rather than nowhere. But so sometimes you'll see less waiting lists because of the type of unit. Certainly there are pockets in more suburban or rural areas where the waiting list might not be so long. But in some places, LeadingAge, we certainly certainly have members who have waiting lists that are 5, 7, 9 years long for their affordable senior housing. Another downside of the HUD programs is that there is a lack of centralized waiting lists or lack of centralized applications. And so you can go to your housing authority and get on the waiting list for their voucher program and their public housing program. But if you want to like look at living in project-based Section 8 or the Section 202 program, you know, there are like 35,000 of those communities across the country. You've got to go to those one by one and get on that individual building's waiting list. And nor is there a place where you could look at HUD's website or anywhere else and said, I wonder where the waiting lists are shorter or longer, or, you know, where should I start my focus? So the process of figuring out the waiting list is really a pain. I'd say too, applications are long, right? It's not a one-page form. You've really got to provide quite a bit of information. And so that process for older adults, for people with low incomes, is painful. I would say I've, you know, been through it with people, and it's a lot of work. And so it really does help to have some support there for the application process. And then there are annual income recertifications, right? As I said, you know, we want to make sure this housing is for the people who need it the most, with the lowest incomes, and that's like to get in, and but because your rent is based on your income, your owner always wants to know what your income is, and so you've got to annually recertify your income. And those annual basis of those income recertifications are just, you know, it's just paperwork, which is hard. But what we never want to hear about is that paperwork becoming a reason that people, not doing that paperwork to become a reason for people not keeping their housing, which is another thing service coordinators often help with. All right, so let's shift over to the low-income housing tax credit program. This is a tax credit program. It's been around since 1986. The federal government expends somewhere $8 or $9 billion a year on the low-income housing tax credit program. I think the HUD budget every year is around $55 billion or so. So the low-income housing tax credit program is a pretty large program at $8 or $9 billion a year in federal tax expenditures. And those dollars get distributed to state housing finance agencies based on a formula. And the state housing finance agencies use, there are a couple of federal requirements around income targeting, right? Like what income groups you have to serve. 10% of those dollars have to make sure they go to nonprofit housing developers. But the state housing finance agencies have quite a bit of flexibility with what else they layer on top of those application requirements, and they run competitions to distribute these tax credits. It's a pretty complicated system, I'd say, but it has, since 1986, resulted in the creation of about 3 million affordable housing units. You'd be hard pressed to find a new affordable housing community today that doesn't have some low-income housing tax credits in it. They are the largest source for new money. Those programs I mentioned at HUD, right? Public housing, Section 8, this 202, the ones that actually create units and buildings, we are not building new ones of those. There's some more in the 202 program, new buildings coming online. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but there are actually laws against building new public housing, federal laws, and we stopped building new Section 8 project-based rental assistance buildings and going into contracts with owners for those 30 or 40 years ago. And so the tax credit program is really the driver for new development. And so it is really important. And it's a driver for new development, but also for preservation of existing affordable housing, or for housing that we want to become affordable housing. So it's a critical funding source, but on its own, it is not as deeply income targeted as the HUD programs, and on its own is not as affordable as the HUD programs. If you layer in a 202 grant, it becomes more deeply income targeted. If you layer in a voucher or a 202 grant, it becomes more affordable because you have to comply with those HUD rules. But generally, these are the buildings where you'll see like a little chart that says 1-person household, your income has to be, 28 to 34,000. 2-person household, your income has to be X to X. And they're really specific about the income levels of people who live in these units, because in the tax credit world, you can be too poor to live in a tax credit unit, and they do require certain minimum incomes, and the rents are different. So instead of my rent being based on my income and my rent fluctuating, if my income fluctuates, the rent in a tax credit unit is the same for every 1-bedroom. All 1-bedrooms have the same rent, and that rent is based on 30% of whatever 60% of the area median income is, and it doesn't fluctuate. It just go up the next year, by whatever the formula is. And so but tax credit developments are out there, and if you have a voucher, those tax credit units have to take a voucher as form of a subsidy to help pay your rent. And as you can see here on this page, almost 30% of tax credit homes are home to older adults, and so they're really important. Tax credits, though, don't have any access beyond the benevolence of whoever the owner is of adding in service coordinators or any kind of services like space for providing a service or anything like that. And so there's no service coordinators generally in tax credit homes, but they do often have shorter waiting lists. And so probably because of all those things I mentioned, there's a lot of advocacy happening right now by most of the national groups to help the low-income housing tax credit program expand, right? Because we like it, we like the money it brings, but we also, those efforts include helping the tax credit program do a better job of serving lower income people in a more affordable way. But check out your local or your state housing finance agency, because they're the ones that administer your state's low-income housing tax credits. And then I just wanted to mention the rural housing service programs. There's around 400,000, maybe 400, maybe close to 500,000 apartments, homes in the rural housing services, multifamily programs. And I just wanted to mention the Section 515 program is the largest of those. That's not specifically for farm labor housing. Because remember, the rural housing service is under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and so they do run their own farm labor programs for migrant farm workers. But the Section 515 program looks in most ways very much like a Section 8 project-based apartment building, where you have a for-profit or a nonprofit owner that owns and manages the building, and the 515 money was the name of the program through which they got the grant to build the housing, and the 521 is the program name, the section of the program through which they get the money to subsidize the program, right? Residents pay a share of their income for rent, and then the subsidy makes up the difference. And so you will see some rural housing service programs out there as well. I mentioned that there's not a single place to find waiting lists and that kind of thing, but this is one source that I always recommend you look to just find out where these buildings are. And it's at the top of your screen there, and it's a you put in an address or a zip code, and you come up with then the dots, there's a key to what these dots are, but it'll come up with what all the buildings, this is a portion of DC where and if you hover over the dot, it'll tell you who the property serves, and you can see here where it says multifamily housing. For some reason, this where the green arrow is, this weird gray circle there, that's how they denote elderly, serves elderly people specifically. But anyway, this website I think is a really good first stop, especially if you're trying to see where the buildings are, where the waiting lists are. And this HUD, even though it's a HUD resource, it does include all the low-income housing housing tax credit properties and the rural housing service properties. So I think it can be really helpful just to identify what's out there. And just a couple more notes around services. Let's move sort of a little bit more to the services side. We talked a little bit about service coordinators. Just want to be clear that all these housing programs I talked about, this is independent housing, right? There is a voluntary nature to any of the services or programming in them. If there is a service coordinator in the building, and we would love to have one in every building, there is a really strict firewall between what the service coordinator knows and has access to and can talk to residents about versus what the building management knows and has access to and can talk to the resident about. You know, fair housing laws prohibit discrimination based on disability, which includes, you know, knowing about someone's vaccination status or asking if they have COVID, right? And so housing management really stays apart from whatever the services component of the building is. Another note about the services component, besides the importance of the fair housing laws, is partnerships. Most affordable senior housing buildings have strong partnerships with the area agency on aging or the local federally qualified health center. And so you'll see, because the service coordinator doesn't provide the services, they just coordinate the services. And so you'll see them wrangling all these different partners to help residents in whatever ways the residents need help. I wanted to say just a couple things about accessibility of the U.S. housing stock. It's unfortunately not a long part of the presentation because there's not much to say because the accessibility of our nation's housing stock is horrible. And I think this is a generous number. This is a number that is repeated everywhere. Less than 4% of America's housing has these three basic features. But I even wonder sometimes if 4% is too high, right? The basic features, right? No step entry into the home, a bedroom and a bathroom on the main living floor, and doorways and hallways that are large enough to accommodate a wheelchair. So for a country that is older, and whose older households are only gaining in their need for mobility features, we have a distinct lack of mobility in our affordable housing stock. It is most prevalent, though, in multifamily housing, right, in new apartment buildings. And the HUD, any way we can get more multifamily buildings online, the more likely it is that we're going to have more accessible housing. I did want to point out this program that I'm sure some of you have heard about. This is a home modification program that has been replicated in a lot of places in the country called Capable. It was started by the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing, and it's a program that works with renters and owners who are older adults to improve their health, independence, and safety. But the program doesn't just bring in a fix-it person to install the grab bar here and the light switch lower there. The program consists of an occupational therapist coming in and doing a really serious assessment and conversation with a resident. Also a registered nurse to help address and connect dots and provide advice and services in the healthcare space. And then that handy worker, that handy person coming in and doing the physical retrofits that are needed. HUD has a new-ish older adult homes modification program that really encourages applicants from nonprofits and state and local governments to apply for these older adult home modification program grants that use Capable as a model of having this occupational therapist, the nurse, the handy worker. And actually just 2 days ago on Monday, HUD released the latest round of competition for $15 million in these home modification grants for older adults. So you can check that out. The sad part is, anyway, I don't know why sometimes these presentations have to get so depressing, but the share of households that HUD serves who are 65 and older has decreased between 1989 and 2019. So in 1989, 35% of HUD assisted households were 65 plus, but by 2019 that had gone down to 30%. And we are gaining numbers of older adults in this country. Why? While we are losing ground. And that's really why our federal advocacy is so important. LeadingAge, we do a ton of advocacy on the Hill and with our members across the country. We're really focused on creating more housing, preserving as much affordable housing as possible. We want more service coordinators, right? We want a service coordinator, not just in every HUD building, but in every tax credit building and every rural housing service building. And we really just, I think on the most basic level, have to acknowledge and know and figure out how to serve older adults in federally assisted communities. If we've got around 2 million older adults who are very poor, who have more chronic health conditions, who have high comorbidities than the general population, and we know precisely where they live, and they live in buildings with space to provide services, then why aren't we making sure they have internet access, that those buildings are disaster resilient, they have generators? Why are we doing more to understand what languages they need the services in, and getting those health and wellness supports into those buildings as we work to expand how many of those types of buildings we have? I often get this question mostly from offices on the Hill. If there's really a need, first of all, people don't, there are a lot of offices on Capitol Hill who don't believe that like the average income of a 202 resident is, $14,000 a year. Like that's just impossible. Who would have an income that low? But then there's this question that always comes up, not always, but often comes up. If there was really a need for more affordable housing, wouldn't the private market address it? Like, wouldn't they figure out a way how to make money off of it? And there's been a lot of research on this. And the private sector is a really important partner. And by the private sector, I include LeadingAge members, right? All of our nonprofit members across the country. But without federal subsidy, the deals don't pencil out, right? People are so poor, and you all know this, that the amount they can afford to pay for their housing is not going to pay the mortgage, it's not going to turn the lights on, it's not going to hire staff for that building. And so a public subsidy is really required. And we've seen state and local governments step up and do more in this space over the last several years, but the total amount that they're putting in really pales in comparison to what the federal government is doing, and certainly to what it should be doing. So again, we focus a lot on the Section 202 program, and I just want to say a couple of things about our advocacy around the Section 202 program. We like it because it's deeply income targeted, right? It serves the lowest income people. Housing is always affordable. It has an emphasis on service coordination, service coordinators. It's nonprofit owned. And so when the contract between the 202 development and HUD is coming up to expire, the nonprofits are mission driven. They're going to renew that contract. The for-profits are going to start to look around and say, wait a minute, are rents better if I jump out of this contract and go market rate? So this nonprofit ownership component is really important. So that's why we're always seeking to expand federal funding, not just to build the units, but to provide that critical ongoing operating subsidy so people truly have affordable housing. This is a sad chart about the amount of funding for new Section 202 homes. You'll see after 2010, it completely lopped off to zero. We've been working for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years to revive the funding for new 202 homes, and have been successful at that. But we've got a long way to go. And so I'll just end with like, what can you do? You can work to build partnerships between affordable senior housing providers and service providers. You can support any and all efforts to expand and preserve service-connected affordable housing, right? Be a YIMBY, be a yes in my backyard. And 3 is don't assume anything. We hear a lot, well, and you all know this too, don't seniors get Social Security? Aren't they fine? Don't they get more than their fair share of public services? None of that's true. Our federal safety net for older adults is as broken as it is for any other population. And we've got a lot of work to do on the Hill and in the administration and across all the states to get to where we need to go. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you, Linda. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm going to take this opportunity to take a few questions for you. So we did have some questions come through in the chat. So the first question was, is it possible for adults over 65 to secure mortgages?
I don't know. I think so. Well, I mean, yeah, people buy houses all the time. I think it has to do, I mean, they'll run into trouble maybe with the size of a mortgage, right? I've read articles about you trying to refinance a mortgage that's $20,000. It might have a hard time finding a bank that makes that low of a loan. But age actually is a fair housing component. And so the lender can't discriminate against you based on how old you are. So I'll change my original answer to absolutely. It's allowable and it's illegal not to do so.
Okay. All right, and then we also have a question that was asked.
I can't hear you.
We also had a question that came in that asked if the resources.hud.gov tool, whether it included independent landlords who accept vouchers.
No, that's a great question, though. No, it doesn't. I think it's around 15 or 20 states have laws that require landlords to accept vouchers as form of payment for their rent, but a lot of states don't. And so in too many states, it's legal for a landlord to say, you can't live here simply because of how you're paying your rent. And so state and local governments who are doing the right thing have passed what we call source of income laws, because the source of your income, how you're able to pay your rent, shouldn't make a difference as long as you pay your rent. But no, the database doesn't include those landlords.
Okay. Since we are aware that the housing gap is getting bigger, what policy in Washington is being discussed to address it? Is there anything new being discussed, or do you think it's just a matter of more funding to be given to the current programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the solutions are well known, and it's construction of new buildings and more vouchers. And depending on where you live, you might need more of one or the other, right? You need to figure out what's really needed where you are. If you have a lot of housing stock, you might just need vouchers to get into those units that are for rent. But if you don't have a lot of housing stock, then you might need new construction. So I would say that we have the right programs. They just need to be better funded.
Thank you. We do have some time for some additional questions. If there are any other questions that anyone would like to ask, if you could please put them into the chat. Right now, all of the questions have been answered. Okay, and I saw that you put in your contact information there. All right. Was there anything else that anyone would like to ask? If not, I am going to go ahead and turn it on over to Sonia Edwards and Elizabeth Sanchez.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Ashley, and good afternoon, everyone. I think Julie is going to share slides for us, so while she does that, I think the flow of this presentation is going to go very well because I'm going to shift the focus a little bit more towards homeownership and older adults and how it then ties back to all of the great programs that Linda just talked about and why we designed the program that we did.
Julie, we're seeing the wrong screen. If you could put the correct PowerPoint up for us, please.
Here we go.
Perfect, thank you.
So Liz and I are going to kind of toggle back and forth through the presentation. So if you could go to the next, you can actually skip 2 slides, Julie, if you would. We're going to talk a little bit, Liz and I, about some of the housing issues and challenges in our communities that we're seeing. Some of it is going to piggyback off of what Linda shared with us. Some is going to be a little bit more housing focused. We're going to talk to you and share with you about how we designed and implemented and how we manage our Aging in Place Know Your Housing Options program. Liz is actually going to go through the curriculum with you a little bit later, and then just high level talk a little bit about our funding model and also how we've partnered with the community and municipalities to really be able to reach those who need our services the most. Next slide. So for those of you that don't know, so I am here on behalf of Branches and ESOP, and Liz is an employee of ESOP. All of us are under the family of Benjamin Rose. So I wanted to kind of go over our missions of all 3 entities so that you can see how we work together and why we are all in the Benjamin Rose family and how we make up the services that we do. So Benjamin Rose's mission is the Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging supports caregivers and empowers all people to age well through research, consumer responsive services, and client advocacy. ESOP's mission is to help adults in all stages of life achieve and maintain financial wellness and housing stability. And Branches helps people transcend poverty by making the dream of homeownership available, affordable, and sustainable for more members of our community, simultaneously contributing to neighborhood stabilization. And I'm going to get a little bit more into it, but I wanted to start with those missions so you can see how we do all function together. So if you can go to the next slide for me, Julie. So I'm going to start with a little bit about ESOP. ESOP stands for Empowering and Strengthening Ohio's People, the nonprofit HUD-approved housing and financial counseling agency. Again, what we do is our mission, right? We help adults in all stages of life achieve and maintain financial wellness and housing stability. And ESOP envisions a community in which everyone has economic opportunity, financial stability, and a safe place to live. And on the next page, we'll go over our history, and I'm going to go real high level here. I can definitely talk to anyone offline if you want to know a little bit more, but ESOP is almost 30 years old. Next year, we'll be 30 years old. And originally, ESOP stood for East Side Organizing Project, and we were founded by Inez Killingsworth, who actually found some wild dogs roaming the neighborhood, and it was preventing children from being able to walk to school and preventing older adults to be able to walk to the store. And so she said, you know, what can we do? And she knocked on the doors of her neighbors and collectively went down and changed ordinances, and they had to hire new dog catchers, and they got the dogs off the street. And she said, what else can we do? So she started organizing small neighborhood groups, and that was through the mid to late 90s. And then faithful community members that were part of these organizations and groups started to just fall off, and when they went to check on them, realized their houses had been foreclosed upon, and they quietly just went away. And digging a little bit deeper and some more research found that it was often due to predatory lending and very heavily targeted to minority neighborhoods. So that positioned, Inez's work positioned us to be able to intervene and fight against foreclosure. And in 2010, we went statewide and had 9 offices serving all 88 counties. Since 2005, I've assisted more than 65,000 homeowners prevent foreclosure. And in 2012, we finally took a little breath. We can come up from all of the foreclosure work and really look at the data, really look at who we've been helping. And it didn't matter where the data was at throughout the state. At least 40% of the people we were helping were clients who were 55 and older. So at a time when, you know, they should have been planning for retirement or well off and well on their way of realizing some of that wealth that Linda talked about earlier, instead they were fighting to save their home. So we took that information in 2013, received a small grant to hold some listening tables and some focus groups, and really just sat and talked with older adults about what they needed to age in place with financial stability. And we used that information to launch our Senior Financial Empowerment Initiative in 2014. And all of that led to our merger with Benjamin Rose in 2017. Next slide, please. So currently ESOP's programs are kind of in two buckets, one under financial wellness and the other under housing stability. Offer financial coaching and counseling, financial education workshops. We have a tremendous match savings program, a benefits enrollment center. We have 0% small dollar loans. We do vision screening and provide vouchers for older adults who do not have vision coverage, and that's through a partnership with Prevent Blindness. We provide free income tax preparation, and another great program that actually was born out of the need from the pandemic, and that's our Connecting Our Seniors to Technology, and that's a program where our older adults learn how to use technology, receive a free laptop, and for the first year either have free internet or subsidized internet services. And through that, through using technology, we connect them back to all of our other programs and make sure that they know how to use the technology to connect to their health care and those kinds of programs. On the housing side, we still do foreclosure prevention. Unfortunately, still a need, and we're seeing it a little bit more than we have in the past. Mortgage assistance, homeownership workshops. We do pre and post purchase counseling, rental assistance, transition counseling, property tax counseling, and also zero interest senior property tax loans. Next slide, Julie. These are our workshops that we currently offer. We provide workshops on how to recognize and avoid financial abuse and scams, preparing for the financial future. That's things like wills and do not resuscitate orders, understanding credit and debt, budgeting, saving, and goal setting, benefiting from benefits, which is a great workshop that really gives an overview of benefits at the federal level, state level, and even some local benefits. And then our homeownership series, we have a homebuyer education class, a new construction class, a home seller class, a post-purchase class, and the one we're going to talk about today is the Aged in Place Know Your Housing Options. And just a little bit about Branches. If you go to the next slide, Julie. Branches is Ohio's first nonprofit full-service real estate agency. We were founded in 2014 as a subsidiary of ESOP, and we were founded as ESOP Realty. We rebranded in 2021 as Branches Real Estate. It's just a doing business as. We are still really at heart ESOP Realty. We focus on missions and not commissions, and the way that we do that is our agents are not paid commissions. They're paid salaries or hourly. This helps us ensure that our clients receive the same high level of service, whether they're buying or selling a $40,000 or a $400,000 home. Any surplus in commissions that come in do fund our other programs like the workshop we're going to talk about today. We also have part of our model where we are licensing employees of land banks and community development corporations to help us further our footprint and our reach and just our breadth of knowledge. And then our focus and impact. So really where we really place most of our focus and what we specialize in is helping first-time buyers purchase and helping older adults gracefully transition out of their last homes. And one of the most critical components of everyone that we touch is empowering them with the tools to thrive in their neighborhoods and not just live in their homes. Because we really believe that volunteering and voting and knowing how to access resources, just becoming really an integral member of the community is what is driving sustainability. When you're engaged and you know where to go for help and you're active in your community, it's creating more sustainability. And then we also try to preserve our communities by planting a tree for every home that's sold. And we do this by partnering with other agencies who can then help us keep those trees alive because we do not have that capacity internally. So we are partnering with other entities to help us do that. Next slide, Julie. All right, let's get into what we came to talk about today. Now that you have all of our background, a little bit about what all of our pieces and parts do, I want you to meet Mr. A. And this is one of our clients that we just worked with about 6 months ago. Mr. A is a 75-year-old male living alone. He lives in a rather large home. It's over 4,000 square feet. It has 5 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. All 5 bedrooms and 4 baths are on the 2nd story. He sleeps, eats, and lives in one room on the 1st floor. The stairs, as you can see, have become impossible, and he's forced to make very tough decisions between paying for things like medication, utilities, property taxes, modifying the home, and even just repairs. He's isolated and he really needs to sell. Selling is more than putting the house on the market. It takes unpacking years of emotions. And most importantly, if he does sell, the proceeds could jeopardize his health care and other critical benefits. But if he doesn't sell, he runs the risk of a property tax foreclosure. Unfortunately, Mr. A is not alone. Many of the older adults that we come in contact with are facing similar situations. It is clients like Mr. A that were why we created the program that we have. A lot of this is similar information that Linda shared with us. I think, really there's a lot of headlines around that shortage of housing stock, right? We're all familiar with that. We've been seeing it for a while. But there's a less visible headline, and that's the crisis that is growing astronomically for our older adults who are paying, as Linda was sharing, more than 30% of their income on housing, and those that are paying more than 50%. I could just echo what Linda said, that there's a strong and urgent need for more advocacy to increase funding and subsidize housing and supportive services right now and in the many years to come. Next slide, Julie, sorry. Housing appreciation. So I think we all know, the Great Recession that everyone has lived through and made it through, and we're on the other side. We lost 12.7% of equity in our housing stock. So we depreciated from January 2008 to 2009, 12.7%. And that was astronomical. We all felt that at every level when we went through that in that period of 2008 to 2009. But from March 2020 to March of 2021, we've seen an even greater appreciation of 13.3% than when we saw the depreciation. I say that because I want us to understand how appreciation works and how it's affecting our older adults. It's affecting all of us. So whether you're a buyer or a seller, we're all being affected by this crazy housing market. And in a ideal market, I was going to say a healthy market, but in an ideal housing market, the appreciation rate is matching the inflation rate. But what has happened is supply and demand have driven appreciation rates, and then inflation not only caught up, but then surpassed. And so we're at a critical place of affordability. And if we go to the next slide, we'll look at just a little bit of the affordability. Nationally, we've seen an average increase of property taxes of 5% across the nation, and some have seen much higher increases than 5%. The cost of maintaining a home, and this is like looking at the last year and a half, the cost of maintaining a home rose over 9%, and that's due to the increased cost of labor and materials to maintain. Groceries and household goods have increased. It's an average of 6.8%, but we know there's some categories in our grocery stores and household goods that have risen much more than 6.8%. Natural gas went up 24%, electricity 9%. Gasoline prices are through the roof. They're actually come back down a little bit recently, I've noticed, but still through the roof from what they were. And Social Security only increased 5.9%. So when you look at all of that, that is usually the only income other than maybe a small pension sometimes. How does someone who's on a fixed income that sees a 5.9% increase offset all of those other increases? It just really becomes unmanageable. And so what was already trying and hard has become impossible for some. And that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing that more. And then add to it interest rates, to get a mortgage have doubled from 2021 to 2022. We were, 2.5%, 3%. And now we're, right about 6%, 5.5%, 6% is where they're looming now. And 5.5% to 6% is not high. I've been in real estate for almost 30 years. I mean, we've seen double-digit interest rates, 5-6%. When it got down to there, we were thrilled. But comparatively to where it was last year, it's high because it's taken someone who's buying a $200,000 home, for example, and that payment is now $400 to $500 more than it was at the other interest rate. So affordability just keeps getting squeezed from every angle. Next slide. So we are at the convergence of a crisis, of several crises coming together. I think all of us probably on here know this statistic that 90% of adults 50 and older want to stay in their homes. They want to age in their homes. And only 1% of current housing stock, this is housing as in single family, not the 4% that included rentals. 1% is equipped for aging in place. And 33% of seniors households have no money left each month after paying essential basic needs and expenses. And so when you bring all of these things together, it's why really doing our aging in place workshop and the work that we're doing through that has become really, really critical to helping older adults and their families. Next slide. So remember Mr. A. If any of you have ever helped a parent or a grandparent or a loved one navigate housing options and navigate, deciding whether or not where they're at is where they should stay, you would understand and appreciate why there's such a need for a holistic model, for an integrated model where we can look at every facet of that older adult's life. And Liz, I'm going to turn it over to Liz shortly, and she's going to share the curriculum with you. But really, we're looking at how do you help someone assess their home? And, the question was earlier, can you get a mortgage after 65? Absolutely. I've helped some of my favorite clients get new mortgages over the age of 65 and change the quality of their life, because I've had some go from rentals into purchasing again and going back into home ownership because it made more sense. It's not very often that is the case, but sometimes it does make more sense. But we're looking at, is the home safe? Is it accessible? And is it affordable? And if not, then we get into all of the other things that we need to talk about, because this is a very big undertaking. We are struggling we have many people like Mr. A who needs to move. He needs to transition. We could sell his house in the blink of an eye, put a sign in the yard, put it in the multiple listing service, and we could have it sold by the end of the week. That's not the problem. The problem is finding somewhere to go, and Linda just did a great job of illustrating why that's the hardest part for us. We will not list an older adult's home and help them sell it until we know where they're going and get them there if possible first. Again, the sale is not the issue. It's making sure all of the other pieces of the puzzle are together and we know where that older adult is going, and we've protected their benefits. We've protected their future benefits. Medicaid has a 5-year look back period, and they're going to look at the sale of this property if that older adult needs Medicaid in that 5-year window. So we need to make sure we are looking at all of that, and we're involving attorneys when we need to set up precautions and set up special needs trust and things like that to make sure that we are not creating a situation that's even worse a year or two down the line. So if you go to the next slide, this is really our holistic solution and how we're looking at the program and how we tackle the aging in place conversations. So the aging in place workshop, you'll see, is really the hub, right? It's really an opportunity for us to do outreach, education, build trust, because oftentimes people will come to us for a workshop first before they would even ever consider talking one-on-one with a counselor. So this at least gets us in a safe space where they can gain the information that they need, build trust, and then from there, our hope is that they'll at least engage with Liz and her team and do a one-on-one counseling session where she can get a little bit more in depth and then be assessed for other programs like the rent and mortgage assistance or maybe one of our 0% interest loans, almost always high benefit assistance, and at least doing a benefit assessment for our clients when we can, the match savings program when needed, and it's usually not very often that branches is needed because we try every other avenue before we get to selling the home. I am a senior real estate specialist as well as some of our other agents. What that means is the National Association of Realtor has created a designation, extra training to specialize agents who would like to be specialized to be able to guide older adults through major life and financial transitions. And then, of course, the tremendous programs that we have through the Benjamin Rose um, side of our organization, which is social workers and behavioral health services and all important home delivered meals and senior centers and our senior companions and our caregiver support programs, so many other programs that we can take one person who comes through this aging in place workshop and we can help connect them to all of those dots on the other side and make sure that we're really looking at how to best help them holistically and not just try to solve for one piece of their puzzle, because their situations are much more complex than just one component. And I think it's time to turn it over to Liz to go over the curriculum with you. It is.
Awesome. Thank you, Sonia. So as mentioned in the previous slides, one of the ways that we were able to assist older adults is by developing a workshop where we have them all in a room in one location and share as much information as possible before we can meet with them individually. So we developed a series of workshops and related supported services called Aging in Place, Know Your Housing Options. We launched workshops virtually back in January of 2021. We do continue to hold the workshops virtually. We also offer the workshops in person or hybrid as needed. In fact, this year we've partnered with senior activity centers throughout our county and have been able to hold these workshops in person at their community centers. So this was certainly a great way to assist older adults by providing those resources to help them overcome challenges or obstacles that they're facing. With that, we've also developed a workbook. This allows them to follow along from home. It includes worksheets, checklists. We also assign homework. We want to keep them engaged, and that will encourage questions when they come back to class. These sessions are going to give older adults, the knowledge and the skills to better assess, have access to resources, to assess safety and financial feasibility of their home, and also the ability to continue to maintain their home and best age in place. So this is how we help the growing number of homeowners who don't know their housing options. So after completing these workshops, we highly recommend that they do meet with individuals as an individual counselor, a HUD certified counselor that is trained and certified to help assess their financial situation and evaluate all the options available to them. As Sonia mentioned, the first spot would be the workshops, the group session. We need to build that, we need to help them feel comfortable, build that rapport to be able to bring them in individually. Next slide. So this here is the course description. Our classes are 3 modules. They're in person, online as mentioned, or hybrid. Currently we're offering them quarterly unless we've partnered with other organizations and go outside of the virtual world. And we do hold them in the afternoon at 1 o'clock until 2:30. We found this is a better time for our older adults due to many appointments that they have earlier in the morning. So this, we have their time and they're more focused on the program. Next slide. So as mentioned, these sessions are broken down in 3 days. The first session is where we first talk about assessing their home. Session 2, we discuss how can they use their equity in the home to keep their home. Session 3 is exploring all of the housing options available to them. And in the earlier slides that Sonia mentioned, there's other electives, other workshop series that they can certainly take advantage of. For example, benefiting from benefits, financial planning for the future, and home seller workshops if the option is for them to sell a home, and preparing them early on what needs to happen to be able to sell that home. Next slide. So during the classes, the hope is that they will gain a better understanding on what home means to them, know what it means to age in place, and not only in the home, but in the community, age in their community and get involved in different activities available in their community. And if they're not aware of those, that's why we're available to help them get those resources. We also want to hope they understand how to create a continuum plan, care plan, evaluate their current home, learn how to calculate home equity, understanding the different types of ways they can use that equity to age in place, like several different loans or grants available to them in the county as well. Know the different types of housing available as they age. What would be their preference based on their circumstances as well. And also explore any other options for housing, how to pay for their housing expenses, and know where to go for next steps and resources. So they'll have the counselors at ESOP to help them through that process. So they now know where to go and have already built that comfort level with that particular counselor. Next slide. So the next 6 slides shows a breakdown of each of the classes. If you take a look, each class, start of class, we have an icebreaker and keeping them engaged. And also that we want them to participate, we want them to feel comfortable and answer questions and share some stories as well. And we have those activities. At the end of class, we go over what that homework assignment is. Remember, they have that workbook that they can reference. And at the beginning of class, that would be that icebreaker for the next 2 days, is to go over that homework assignment. And again, that will encourage questions that they didn't even think of asking, or they didn't know of certain things that were available based on the previous classes that they have attended. So you can probably jump to past the 6 slides, because this is the syllabus, I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. So we do start our workshop by asking participants in one word, what does home mean to you? As we hear, as they share, we hear what they're feeling. Home is a feeling, it is not a place. So whether it's security, family, we hear it's not that structure, it's what it makes them feel. Next slide. So home, whether it's a single home, a townhouse, an apartment, a mobile home, what we cover in our workshop apply regardless of the housing status, the ownership status, or the housing type. And I want to end by saying that home should be a safe haven for all, especially our older adults that have lived in these homes for so many years. It's a place that way they want to continue to live with their families, their pets, their friends, and most of all is to build memories. And I will turn it back over to Sonia.
Thanks, Liz. So I'm just going to go over who we've partnered with, kind of how we've structured the program and what's worked for us. I've seen a few questions come up in the chat, and really we'll leave more time for question and answers so that way you can ask specific questions that you have. But I think this is just a good place to show you. We not only partnered with municipalities, but we partnered to develop the curriculum itself. So one of our suburbs actually has very high property taxes, and we were trying to assist with some of the older adults in their community that was having issues with delinquent property taxes. And what we found is there was really no way to make it affordable. And so how could we create a way to engage in a way that didn't start off with maybe you should sell? It was let them learn the information and make the assessment themselves and then help them along the way. We found that approach to be much better than just that start conversation right off the bat of you just can't afford this. It helped them come to that decision on their own. So the municipalities help us by providing property tax delinquency list for households who who are on the homestead exemption list, which is typically someone who is an older adult or disabled. This allows us to do some direct mailings, some targeted outreach. They also include our information in their mailings, so whether that's a letter from the mayor or just like an event calendar. They also do some social media posts to share about our workshop and our other services. We work a lot with our council persons. They love to put our flyers in their newsletters. We've even been invited to speak at several of their neighborhood meetings. If you know anything about older adults, they're usually the ones that vote, and they are the ones who remain consistent and engaged in their community for as long as they can. So we often found that when we went to these neighborhood meetings, that's usually who was there. And if not, it was those that were connected to the older adults in the community. I think saying older adult serving agencies goes without saying. Of course, we have to be connected and tied there. We do that in all of our work anyways, but the Department of Adult and Protective Services have been great partners, our area agencies on aging, and our CSEP programs, our Senior Community Service Employment programs, have been great ways for us to partner and to share this information with our shared clients. And then community development corporations and other nonprofits, we continue to partner. They know their communities very well. They know the older adults who might need assistance, and they're able to make those connections for us. We also attend collaboration meetings. We share marketing materials and social media posts. And on the next slide, a little bit about how do we fund it? How do we pay to provide these services? It's a lot of different layers and levels of funding, but I'll just share kind of high level with you. We do have a sponsorship opportunity for our workshops where mostly it's lenders who want to sponsor our workshops. And when they sponsor, they do sponsor our entire suite of homeownership workshops. So oftentimes they're sponsoring because they really want to get in front of those clients that are buying, but their support does help provide funding for all of our homeownership workshops. Again, working with municipalities, we have fee-for-service contracts at the national level, at the county level, at the state level, at our city level that helps. As a HUD organization, we are able to get reimbursed on a fee-for-service basis for the counseling side of things, and some contracts do allow us to bill for the workshops. Our local association of realtors provided some generous funding to help us build the curriculum. And ARELO is the Association of Real Estate Law Officials, licensed law officials. So it's a group of attorneys who are really looking at licensing laws around the nation for real estate agents. They were very generous as well to help us with some funding. And then our real estate commissions that go above and beyond the expenses for branches, what we generate also supports our workshops and counseling services. So just some impact. This is an slide's a few months old and I did not have time to update it. I apologize, but I think we've only done one workshop since then, but I think we have helped 2 other people transition. So at this time when we did this slide, we had done 18 workshop sessions with 178 unique participants, and just over half of them, so 93, engaged in some kind of wraparound service. So they connected to one of those dots that we showed you earlier. When you look at the breakdown of race, this looks like most of our other programs and who we serve. Age, this is 76% of our workshop participants were between 65 and 84, with 55% falling in that 65 to 74 mark. I will say we do have family members and caregivers who actually attend the workshops, sometimes with the older adult and sometimes on their own, to really help them be able to go back and have the conversation with their loved ones. And we've also done counseling sessions with both caregivers and the loved one, or just caregivers, to really try to get through how do we help get to the next stage, the next phase, the next steps, connect those dots. Gender, this looks very, I'm going to try not to say anything wrong here, because I have a reason why I think that almost all of our services are 75 to 80% female, and only 20 to 25% male. And I'm going to say this stereotype thing and try not to get in trouble, but it's just like men not asking for directions, right? I think that's part of it. But no, honestly, on a serious note, I think it's really because women are more social. That's who is, out in the community. That is also who is going to senior centers, and they are the ones interacting, so they're finding out about the service. We also have more older women than men, and we also have quite a few, unfortunately. We have situations where there are women who never took care of the finances or anything to do with the household, budget or anything like that. They don't even know if there's a mortgage. The husband passes away, and then they end up having to come to us because they're trying to navigate that now on their own. So it's all of those different factors. I just always joke about not asking for directions, but honestly, we see this across the board in our services, that it is women who are engaging more. And then outcomes wise, we have there's about 35 now who are currently receiving some kind of assistance, whether we're working with them. The ones that are currently receiving assistance, most of them, it's because we're trying to find somewhere for them to go. They've made the decision that they need to transition. We are just struggling. We are on all of those waiting lists, like Linda was talking about. We've done 300 applications to help them get on all of these waiting lists, and now we're just waiting for something to come open to help them actually finish the transition. We have transitioned 8 successfully, and 54 we have stabilized their housing situation. So what does that mean? We might have connected them to benefits, might have been the issue. Maybe they needed someone to come in the home and help, and they didn't know that they could connect to that resource. We had some that needed case managers or behavioral health specialists to really help them be able to stay. Some, actually, we did find some funding to help with some repairs, or they qualified for a home equity loan or even an interest-free loan of what they needed to be able to stay. So when we say stabilized housing, it's all of those other things, that are coming into play. Only 8 have transitioned, and I think that's a great number, because that is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is really, if at all possible, to help them stay where they want to stay. Linda said it earlier, our housing stock is older than we are, and so it's really hard. It wasn't built in a way to really have a bedroom and a bathroom on that main floor, and those hallways are so narrow, and there's steps every direction trying to get in and out. And I think that's one of the other areas, and I'm so proud of Benjamin Rose and the work that Orion is doing to really stay in the advocacy component of trying to help educate builders and those that are starting to build new properties to build universal design properties. Make sure there's at least 1 bathroom, 1 bedroom on the main floor. It is so important, and I think we should all be that voice as often as we can. It's a little bit more expensive to build because the foundation is the most expensive part, but the long-term investment and return on that investment is so much greater than what it cost to build. So I appreciate all of that advocacy. And I think this might be our last slide, Julie. We can open it up. Yep, this is just a review of what we talked about today.
Thank you both for sharing your work with us. We had a lot of comments in the chat talking about how excellent your presentation was. We do have some questions that some people have entered into the chat. So I know you kind of touched on this, but they were wondering if you coordinate with real estate agents in the community.
Absolutely. So, obviously we offer real estate services, but we do not steer anyone. We always make sure that it's our job to educate and make sure they know how to interview and hire the agent that's best for them. And if there's particular areas and we happen to know of some agents in that area, we always make those recommendations. Liz is, as the housing counselor, who's often that first touch point. She's been in this space for 25 years. She knows a lot of agents outside of us. And when someone needs that, sometimes it's a language issue. Maybe someone needs someone that speaks a specific language, and we try to make those connections based on the needs.
Thank you. If anyone has any questions that they haven't entered into the chat, now would be a good time for you to go ahead and post them in there for me, please. They would like to know, what are your thoughts on programs that offer loans but place a lien on the home?
There are a couple different kinds of liens that sometimes happen with those single purpose loans and grants. And one is what they call a soft lien that's forgiven, usually 20% a year over 5 years, and then they come off. Those are great. It's the it's the due on sale ones that can cause an issue. I'm not critical of them. There's not interest that accumulates during that time. It's just a matter of everyone understanding that it's there. So, I share a lot with older adults. I usually say, it was a long time before we would talk about sex, right? It was not an open conversation, but now sex is everywhere and everybody talks about it and talks about it way too much. As far as I'm concerned, it's everywhere. You can't watch a commercial, but we still go in the other room to talk about money. And we have to start having those open conversations about money with those that we love and those that are going to be responsible to handle our finances when we are no longer able to. And things like those liens that get placed on a property, which are critical to help someone stay, those that are going to be responsible to help with the finances later needs to know it's there. Because when they say on sale, that also means refinance. So maybe someone's retirement plan is, they got this lien on the property and now they plan on refinancing about the time of retirement or right before they retire, so they can pull the equity to use however they want. That is going to have to be paid unless they have a really good reason, and it's very few of them will subordinate it again. So I think it's just an education thing, but I think it's a great way to keep people from having to pay it back while they're living there and can't afford it.
Thank you. Could you give us some more information about the classes? When are they being held?
So currently we're doing quarterly virtually. We figured out that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is best. We started them out on a 4-day and we had benefits like built in on the 4th day, and it was a struggle to get people to stay engaged. It's really hard for some older adults to have truthfully 4 days in a row without an appointment. And so that became kind of a barrier. And so we decided to try Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We've tried 10 o'clock in the morning. It was fair attendance. 1 o'clock was best. We tried evenings. That didn't work. Or all of our other homeownership workshops are at 6 in the evening. This one did not work in the evening, unless it's tied to something. Now, if we have, let's say, a council person who has an evening meeting and they invite us to come and share the information at their meeting, well attended. So what we've learned is you have to meet people where they're already gathering for a reason. They're already gathering to bring the information, or for us, the 1 to 2:30 works best. And we do have all of our workshops listed on our website under the events page as well, except for those private ones that we're doing like in collaboration with maybe an apartment building or a senior center. Some of those we might not have on there, but the general calendar for the year for the virtual ones are on there.
Thank you. And we had one of our attendees, they said that they were trying to promote adaptable homes. They said that based on their experience, the homes with the 4 features that were described by Linda previously that universal design is not really that practical to implement. So what are your thoughts on that comment?
It's very true because it is costly. Foundations are the most expensive part of the house. So when you are trying to fit more on one floor, you need a larger foundation. It costs a little bit more money to figure out how to do zero entry, right? Wider doorways and wider hallways, right? It's just not, so it's not the cookie cutter house that they're used to building. So that's where it becomes a little bit more costly. For us, what has worked is we have tremendous land banks and other nonprofit organizations who are doing some of the building, and they're able to provide what's called gap funding, and they're offsetting some of that expense. And so we're just kind of pushing on them. I would say to me, what I've been saying for a while is when we first started building green homes and we wanted energy efficiency, that really happened by the government bringing down funds to offset, like you would get credits if you did green building. I think we need to see that same process happen for universal design. We need to see the money come from the government down that is giving credits and offsetting some of that to help ensure that houses are being built with universal design, because now every house is built green pretty much. It's really hard to not have at least just the general greening built into new construction, but that's just come from years of practice and years of builders doing it and figuring out more efficient ways to do it. And I think it will happen. It's just going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of voices and people sharing and showing them what it means, because if this is not the space they've been in, they're not thinking about it. And neither are our millennials who are building, who need to be thinking about it, right? So it's education across the board.
Thank you, Sonia. Would the workshop be relevant to other states?
It should be. We have not built anything in there that is state specific. It's pretty universal. No matter where you are, you should be looking at assessing those things. What might be a little bit unique is maybe what's available as far as some of your housing choices might be a little bit different, but that should be, really, most of it should be universal.
Great. And how might you evaluate additional programs someone might need from other agencies when you're assisting them with their housing related to empowering homeowners with the tools to thrive in their neighborhood?
So we just have been in this space for a long time. So for us, it's, we are partnered with most of our community development corporations, who are kind of the linchpins of the communities themselves in each neighborhood. So when we are trying to partner them, we are usually working with our community development corporations to know which programs are in their communities. And then a lot of it is just, we have a post-purchase workshop, and it's asking those questions. Did you find somewhere to volunteer? Have you volunteered since last quarter when we met, since you've bought your house? Where's your new favorite hangout? It's just trying to make sure that they're not just moving into their house and staying in their house and not connecting to their community. So really how they connect is going to be based on what they need and what they like. It's just trying to help facilitate that thought process in anywhere that we can if they need us. And then we have tons and tons of resources for, anything someone would need in particular communities, because that's the work our housing counselors are already doing. So they have resource guides that are very long that they're using.
Thank you for providing that additional information. So our President and CEO, Orion Bell, would like to say something at this time.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Ashley, and thanks everyone for being part of this workshop this afternoon. As you can tell from the conversation today, our organization is involved in a number of elements along the pathway and conversations about housing, everything from the programs that Sonia and Liz talked about this afternoon. We also operate HUD 202 property here in the Cleveland area. And from our very earliest days, we have addressed the challenge of helping people age in place in the community. I did want to mention, just for as we had a lot of conversation about accessibility and some of the programming there, and something that you may have in your communities is there's something called a CAPS certification, which is the Home Builders Program, which is a certified aging in place specialist. And if you are interested, if your agency is interested in learning more about the kinds of things that maybe would be done, or some of the appropriate, particularly things that are retrofits or things that might be part of a conversation about helping a person age in place, whether that's a minor bathroom modification or kitchen modifications that allow somebody to stay in their home, things like relocating the laundry facilities from the basement to the main level, or some of those kinds of opportunities. And some of those can be actually can be pretty affordable. That not everything is a complete bathroom rebuild or kitchen redesign. Sometimes these are some fairly simple and practical adaptations that can be done in that space. And so there are a lot of resources in that environment. The other thing I just wanted to say, I think you heard this from our staff, is that there's a lot of folks out there. I mean, there's a market in real estate. There's a market for home renovations. There's a market for design. There's a market for banking and all the financial products that are all of that. And like in any industry, there's some very reputable providers, and there's some others that maybe are not so much. And what's important for us in our space, and why have a nonprofit real estate brokerage? Why participate in this space as a nonprofit organization? Is that we want to make sure that there is an opportunity, there's an advocate for the consumer in that conversation. And so there are some great resources. There's a lot of ways to crack this particular nut. There's a lot of options about how people can go about addressing their housing needs and their other financial needs as they grow older. And there's not one right answer. And so I always think it's important that we make sure that the consumer's voice is heard in that conversation. So thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Orion. I appreciate that additional information. Was there anyone else who had any additional questions that would like to be answered at this time? So I know that we did have some additional comments that came in. And I believe there was at least one more question. So, yes. There was a question about how do you assist in the application process with the paperwork for the HUD housing that you mentioned?
So we are really just helping complete the application and make sure they get to the right places. Some of it is now virtual or electronic applications, which has made life a lot easier. But the hardest part is not knowing the wait list ahead of time and trying to coordinate all of that. Like there's not a central location that says like these are the wait lists for all of these properties. It is a lot of calling. It is a lot of emailing. And then from there, some of those wait lists are simple and it's just name, phone number, age, and maybe a couple other little things, income maybe. Others are really long, full applications even to get on the wait list. But it's really just us manually helping whatever that may look like. And thankfully, our counselors and our benefit coordinator is helping with some of those applications.
Thank you. And we did post that link in the chat for additional information. And we will be sharing a copy of the presentation. It will be posted onto our website. I know that several of you were asking about that as well. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you so much for our wonderful presenters for sharing such great information. In the chat, you will find a link for a webinar evaluation that we hope that you will complete. Your feedback is important to us as it helps us to improve our programming. The link will also be shared with you in an email soon. We hope you will plan to join us for future webinars that we hold throughout the year. More information can be found about all of Benjamin Rose's research, services, programs, and events at www.benrose.org. Thank you, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.